Here to help me with the non-quarterback version of our annual draft series, it's two guys you might be familiar with. They did the quarterbacks with me. Felt this was the best way to do it. Kind of keep things even, have the same sort of dynamics. We flip things around a little bit, and we'll get to that. But joining me today, first of all, from the 33rd team, from Bleacher Report, from Reception Perception, doing all sorts of stuff in your football content world, it's Derrik Klassen. Derrik, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. We were talking about this a little bit pre-show. This is a much different show for me than the quarterback show. That one was pretty easy to rank and see how I wanted to put this together. This racks my brain a little bit, so this is going to be a good time.
We'll dig into the overarching considerations before we actually start the draft. But before we do that, also joining us today, it's our old friend Diante Lee. Diante, how you doing, man?
I'm great, man. Spring ball is getting started for us this afternoon, so I'm locked in, ready to go.
Exciting times.
Absolutely. So my mind was already on edge rushers and linebackers and the whole deal. So going through this process was pretty fun. My mind has already been locked in on finding value on things that are not quarterbacks.
There are so many different considerations when you're doing this draft compared to the quarterbacks. Contracts matter more just because they're all over the place. So many different positions to take into account. Feels like age is very important because we have guys all over the place. And the thing that I noticed when I was doing this, the lack of premium position talent from the 2023 draft is very apparent when you're doing this exercise because there aren't that many guys at high-end positions that are cheap for much longer. You have to talk yourself into, and you have to make some compromises if you're going to go the cheap route with this list of players. And I think you guys will see that bear out as you see the order that these guys come off the board. So just blanket rules and housekeeping before we get started. 3 years, the next 3 years, contracts do matter. And you could go either way about whether this is an actual team that you're building or you're just trying to pick off value. I like to have a nice smattering of positions just because I like to think of it that way, and I think it helps the conversation. But just so you know, I did not give these guys any charge to pick different positions and actually build a football team. This is more about a value proposition and a value-based draft than it is assembling an NFL roster draft. So last time I was second. Diante had the first pick. Derrik had the third pick. We're going to flip that today. Derrik, you are going to have the first pick in this draft of the 5 rounds that we're doing. Who is the number one pick for you in the 2024 non-quarterback draft?
I don't think this is quite as, turn your brain off and just pick the guy as the quarterback one. Obviously, with the quarterbacks, you just take Patrick Mahomes. You don't think about it. But I think it's pretty close. And for me, it's Myles Garrett. I mean, to me, Myles Garrett is just far and away probably just the far and away best defender in the NFL right now. 285 pounds should not move that way. It's impossible. Some of what he does in terms of being able to bend the edge, some of his counter moves, some of his spin moves, there's just a nimbleness to 285 pounds that makes absolutely zero sense to me. And then you obviously combine that with, you get the power and length that you would typically ascribe to a guy who's 6'5", 285 pounds. He just, in terms of the physical tool set, has absolutely everything as a pass rusher, and then his hands are fantastic. He understands when to throw in his counter moves and all that stuff. And then as a run defender, I actually think he's kind of come along over the course of his career. Early in his career, he was a little, even coming out of college, he could be a little bit up and down. He's still not in the Khalil Mack territory. That guy at his best was one of the best run defending edges I've ever seen. Myles Garrett isn't up there, but he can get into the backfield, and I think he's done a better job of being able to contain the edge now. So Myles Garrett, man, he is just, I would take him over anybody, contracts regardless. I don't care if I'm paying him $1 billion. He, to me, is just such a special player.
Diante, who is the number one player on your board?
Myles Garrett.
Yeah, I also had Myles Garrett as the number one player on my board. I was so curious who the number one pick would be because in previous years, it's just been Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald has been at the top of this draft in each of I think every year since we've started doing it. So Aaron Donald being removed, and I was like, all right, who's going to go number one? The Myles Garrett considerations, if you look at the contract, it's actually kind of cheating for this exercise. He has $37.5 million in 2027 that voids. So his cap numbers for the next 3 years are actually pretty tolerable. It's $20 million each of the next 3 years. So if you're, it's a technicality. We don't have to worry about the 4th year. So I think Myles Garrett is a pretty easy number 1 choice, or at least it was for me. So I'm a little bit bummed because I was hoping I would get him at 2 because he's expensive and he's a little bit older, but did not turn out that way. And that's just how it goes for me.
Well, and that was the thing I was really interested about is where everybody's priorities lied for this. Like for quarterbacks, I was probably a little bit more contract conscious with how I was ranking guys. I think with this one, I'm probably looking at it a little bit more like who are the best players? Let me just rank the best players first, and then we'll figure out the contract stuff a little bit like down the line. And then I think, obviously you scale that with age as we go. But to me, Myles Garrett, for the player that you're going to get, no matter where you think he is on his trajectory or development curve, the next 3 years probably still look like the best edge rusher in the NFL. So in terms of value, I'd much rather have that than going younger just for the sake of going younger.
Right. And age wasn't a concern for me because you're going to get a 29, 30, and 31. So obviously at a certain point you get on the wrong end of 30. But for him, so let's say you lose 10% of the speed and agility he has. Okay, he's still 280 pounds and stronger than everybody else. Like at that point, he's still like Dwight Freeney? Like, I don't care. Like if he loses a little bit, I'm willing to incur the risk of maybe he loses half a step because the consequence of that is meaningless. Like he's still probably a top 3 pass rusher in the league, even if that happens.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And we saw the best version of him last year when he was surrounded by the requisite help. And I think that entry and that data point is important if you're just going to throw him at number 1 without thinking much about it. And I have no problem with that. At number 2, I am going to go a little bit younger and a little bit cheaper. But even if I wasn't, even if those weren't considerations, I still think you could make an argument that he's number 2. I'm picking Micah Parsons. He's 25 years old. It'll be age 25, 26, and 27 seasons. He's been one of, if not the most productive pass rushers on a per snap basis in the NFL over the last couple of years. And if you look at the contracts, it's $5 million this year, 21 next year, and then he's up for an extension. It's going to be the cheap first year of an extension. So I would assume that over those 3 years, you're talking like $15 million on average. If you look at a lot of the guys that we're going to discuss in this exercise, a $15 million average over the next 3 years is pretty low compared to some of the other best players in the NFL. So that kind of triumvirate of age, production, value, I think that he's a pretty easy one for me here at number 2. Diante, what do you think about that?
I mean, the dude is a freak, right? Like if you're looking at what he is as a pass rusher, and then you have to consider the fact that he basically only was really a pass rusher in the NFL, right? So in terms of just his arc, in terms of understanding the position and how to apply some of his athletic freakiness to the position to be as productive as he's been so early in his career, it's scary. And then you look at the way that he's been weaponized while Dan Quinn was there. I'm really fascinated to see what Mike Zimmer is going to do for him with trying to create these bear and mug fronts to make sure that he keeps one-on-ones, right? He has that combination of freaky physical traits and this kind of malleability within the scheme where I don't just have to play him out on the edge. I can move him and let him work a one-on-one over a center. We can kind of, pick the fish with this guy and line him up over a guard, whatever we need to do to, kind of free him up. And I think to the same point we were making about Myles Garrett, while he's not a dominant run defender all the time, what you get out of him when he is locked in and playing high motor football, it's game wrecking. There's really only Myles Garrett that's in the conversation for me in terms of a guy that when it's switched all the way on, there's just nothing you can do as an offense to keep his effect away from the game.
Derrik, where was Micah Parsons for you? He was like top 4, top 5 for me. So it was kind of like I thought there was maybe a small chance he could be there at my next pick, just depending on who valued what. Yeah, like he was right up there. I do think he's interesting compared to Myles Garrett though, because like Garrett, as I said, huge guy who just has no right to be as nimble and as quick as he is. Parsons is kind of the opposite, where he's a little bit undersized for like a true defensive end. He has no right to be as strong and powerful as he is. Like he will just when he gets hands in your chest, you're gone. Like you're just so toast. So it's really cool watching those two in comparison to each other, because like I said, they're just physically very, very different, but they can kind of accomplish almost the same things because of just how athletically gifted they are.
I'm thinking back to Howie Roseman in his post-draft press conference when he was talking about, I think it was Johnny Wilson actually, when he was discussing late round picks. But he was saying, if you're going to draft a guy in the 6th or 7th round, what I want to do is I want to draft guys who are unusual. And with Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons, we're talking about unusual people. the way
Right.
they move physically, how flexible they are. And I think if you're talking about the top of this draft, that's what I want. I want unusual types of players that just have a completely different physical skill set than everyone else. And I think that you could pretty safely say that about Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons. All right, Diante, you're up here at number 3. So your number 2 player is still on the board. I'm very curious about who this is.
It's Justin Jefferson for me. I'm going with Justin.
He was
Jefferson
3 for
here.
me.
I just think that, and that's considering, right, that this is as cheap as he is ever going to be for as long as he is an NFL football player in this season, right? Like knowing that he is going to set the market or reset the market, depending on how the timing works out with him and the rest of the receiving class that's coming up contract wise, you just can't replace that guy. Is like an offense unto himself, right? And we got to see a lot of that last year. What you can build around him, the fact that you can move him around, he can play the X and be a true X. You can play him as a move around guy, and he can be a yak player for you. He can work the middle of the field if you need him to. There's just so much detail to his game in terms of being a complete wide receiver. If you consider some of the guys that we had in that conversation 3-4 years ago, in terms of Devontae Adams and those guys, as they are kind of, past that peak, he's the next guy on the curve that's going to be that complete, can't do anything with them. Your best bet is to try to double cover him or play cloud coverage over him and hope that you just get a bunch of eyes and bodies next to him, because if he gets one-on-one coverage, you can never expect that you're going to win that matchup.
You look at it, even though he's going to be really expensive. So the numbers over the next 3 years, he's on the final year of his deal now. It's at 19.8. Then you get the first 2 years of an extension. When I was playing it out, I was like, all right, let's say it's 18 and 30, right? In the first 2 years. It's a $23 million a year average over the next 3 years. That's expensive, but there aren't that many other receivers that I would want that are cheaper. I mean, if you look at that list, Jamar Chase has one more cheap year than Jefferson does, but he's going to get pretty expensive pretty fast. Yep. The only guys who have multiple cheap years left would be the guys from the 2022 class. So that's like Chris Olave, Drake London, solid players, but not stars.
Not even in the conversation.
Then, the 2023 class, there's no one to really work with. So if you're going to go receiver here, you either have to make some real compromises on price, or you have to be willing to live with a guy who is expensive. And I think all of us were willing to live with Justin Jefferson being as expensive as he is.
Absolutely.
He would have been my first offensive player off the board. Like he is, I mean, like Diante said, he is an offense by himself. Because the thing is, even some of these other star receivers that probably will go at some point in this draft, limited is the wrong word, but there's like a very obvious way how to use them. That's just not the case with Justin Jefferson, man. Like you could put him in any conceivable receiver role and he will be the best player on the field no matter what you do. Which I think gives, when you have an offensive coordinator or an offensive play caller like Kevin O'Connell, it's a disgusting duo, those two. So yeah, very easy pick here.
The only reason I went Parsons over Jefferson is because I think if you look at some of the other edge rushers who are available, they're all much more expensive than Micah Parsons is going to be. The gap between Jefferson and the rest of those guys, they're about the same price. That's why I gave the slight edge to Parsons, but I think that Justin Jefferson is 100% in that conversation to go off the board after Myles Garrett.
I agree. And then I think, like, if you're thinking on the age curve, right, outside of Will Anderson, there's really nobody else that's in the conversation on the age curve with where Micah Parsons is at. At that point, you're talking Nick Bosa, who is starting to walk towards 30. You're talking about Maxx Crosby.
And it's very expensive. And Maxx Crosby is pretty expensive. Exactly. There are only a couple other guys that are younger at the edge rusher spots. And again, you'd be compromising a little bit in terms of upside and talent. And we'll have that conversation as we get a little bit deeper, because I do think there are a couple interesting names. All right. We're back to Derrik here at number 4. Derrik, where are you going?
I'm caught between two positions, but I think one, I'm going to have more options a little bit later in the draft. So I'm going to go with the other one. I'm going to go Patrick Surtain, corner from Denver. I still think he is unbelievable. Obviously, because, Denver's kind of turmoil the past 2 years. I think we've tuned them out a little bit. But when I watch him play, he is just everything I love about a cornerback. He is incredibly smart. He is incredibly physical. He has very long arms. He's a lot faster, truthfully, than I thought he was coming out of college, which is like kind of what took him from, to me, like a B+ player coming out of college to being a true superstar in the NFL. But you just watch, like,
you never had to watch him recover or play out of position in college. Exactly. So you never had to know if he had catch-up speed. He was always perfectly positioned and playing in such control that it looked like he was playing slow.
That's what it is. It's all of it is so in control. It's almost like, we were talking about CJ Stroud on the quarterback show, where I was like, every single movement he has, it just feels like it's all together and in one motion, like he's moving as if he's water. That is how Patrick Surtain plays cornerback. And it allows him to cover every kind of receiver. And then you even this is very, the easy thing to do, but if you just watch all of his matchups against Davante Adams, no other corner in Davante Adams' like career, in terms of from when he got good, has ever played Davante that way. Like it's unbelievable the way that he plays. And Davante will get him 2-3 times a game, but to be able to go one-on-one with him for 4 quarters is unbelievable. So Surtain, to me, I truly think in a league where there really aren't that many true go put him on anybody, shadow him from the slot, outside, doesn't matter, go let him play one-on-one ball. There's really only maybe 2 or 3 guys in the league, and he, to me, is the one that fits my mold of cornerback the best. So Surtain's my pick.
Would he have been your top corner, Diante?
Yeah, he was my number 1 corner. That's why I was upset. I was hoping that maybe Sauce would go ahead of him. I was hoping maybe like a younger corner might get a little bit of a nod, especially considering, like Derek said, how much Denver's defense is cratered, right? But you can turn on the film any week, and it's like, this is the prototype, man. Like, and we're not making these guys anymore that play corner. We don't see enough guys physically that have that legit 6'1" plus, long arms, legitimate top end speed, the hip mobility to be able to cover the entire route tree, and he plays the ball excellently. Like, it's really him and Sauce when we talk about like size prototypes that meet that mold. And I just think that Patrick Surtain is a step ahead when you talk about like man-to-man details, being able to play any receiver in any part of the route tree throughout the game. Like that's what separates them from me and one of my favorite players to watch in the NFL. Probably my favorite guy that I've ever watched from college to the NFL, getting ready for his draft.
Still relatively cheap in relation to this exercise. 6.7 this year, 19.8 next year, and then the first year of what I assume will be a market-setting extension, but
sure.
Let's say that's $18 million for the guys that we're talking about on this list. That's actually pretty good. I won't dig in any more to the Sauce versus Patrick Surtain thing. We'll talk about that more when Sauce goes, because I don't want either of you to show your hands more than you want to right now. So we'll wait till he actually comes off the board. All right, so that means I'm picking at 5. And I'm happy because the 2 guys I wanted here, or 2 guys I was thinking I would have to choose between, are still here. I'm taking Penei Sewell.
If I didn't take Surtain, that's what I was doing.
Literally, if it wasn't going to be Surtain, it was going to be Sewell for me too.
So I had Penei Sewell and one other guy, and I'll just say who it is. It was between Penei Sewell and Ja'Marr Chase for me. And the fact that we're making decisions between Penei Sewell and Ja'Marr Chase 3 years in, I feel
the meme will never die.
I feel like it's so appropriate, though. The fact that they're right here and stacked up, I think as you do it now as a historical exercise, it's even more interesting that they've pretty much been just as valuable as one another during their careers. We can make an argument that players like Sewell are more scarce, and I think that's right. And I think that's why I'm willing to take him here. And even after getting that extension, he's $8 million this year, 9.8 next year, and then 28 in year 3. It's a $15 million average. You look at all the other tackles that you would take ahead of him, he's still cheaper, he's younger, and he might be better. I mean, there are a couple guys in the conversation, but everyone that's close to him in terms of youth and production is going to be a little bit more expensive in this exercise. And the way that he played last year, and just the way that the Lions could build their offense in a lot of ways through their right tackle, was insane. And we've gotten to a place now where I think right tackles and left tackles, as evidenced by his contract, there really isn't much of a difference. So there aren't any boxes that he isn't checking at this point. So I feel pretty good about getting him here at 5.
I'm with you. I mean, again, when you talk about guys that younger, like I look at him and Tristan Wirfs are probably the 2 top young tackles that I would have considered high in this. And Penei Sewell, over what we've seen the last 2 years, the versatility, what they're able to do with him with the run game, the way that he's pass protected. You think about the size, the way he projects, the consistency basically since day one. You can't really argue against it. The dude checks every box. There's no reason not to be confident that when he gets paid, he is still going, that he's not going to continue to be the best right tackle in the NFL.
Wirfs is a year older. And he has no cheap years really left on his deal. It's 18.6 this year, and then you're on an extension. Rashawn Slater's probably in that conversation. He's got one cheap year left, but the trajectory is not the same it is with Sewell, who's gotten better every single year, and he's a year older. So for me, this one was pretty easy. All right, so 6 is we're back to Diante.
Yep.
What do you got?
This is where it gets tough. This is where it starts getting tough for me. So in the spirit of the meme, I'm gonna go Ja'Marr Chase here. In the spirit of the meme, I'll go Ja'Marr Chase here. Because that was kind of a coin flip for me. I figured that those names would be right around here for me for the second pick. But I mean, again, you're talking about when he does set the market. Do I think he's going to be better than Justin Jefferson when it's his turn to get paid? No. But in terms of market setting talents at this position, if I've got to settle on that, I would much rather have it be Ja'Marr Chase than, wide receivers that are down the line, right? Like I think about AJ Brown, who's not going to be as expensive, but I'd rather have Ja'Marr Chase than AJ Brown, I think. You think about other wide receivers down the line. CD Lamb is going to be another guy that's highly paid. I don't think he's in the same conversation as a tier 1 guy like a Ja'Marr Chase, like a Justin Jefferson, for as much as I like CD. And I don't want to wait, until later on in this draft and have to be stuck with that when you consider contracts. So Ja'Marr Chase, still great vertical threat, right? Ball winner, great yak player. I think that he's shown, as the years have gone on and as Cincinnati's offense, and this is something we talked about with Joe Burrow as well, as that offense has evolved and asked more out of Ja'Marr Chase, we've seen him answer the call as a wide receiver, right? And they found more ways to weaponize him outside of just running him up and down the vertical tree. And I love to see that in his game. And that's why, to me, I think he should be rightfully the second wide receiver to come off the board.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on every single bit of that. I think the evolution of their offense and the different wrinkles with him, whether it's how he was used in the slot, how he was used getting the ball in his hands, so many different new kind of functions within their offense that I think he was able to play in this year. That was really cool to watch. Derrik, how do you tier the receivers out? Do you feel like it's Jefferson, Chase, and then a slight drop off with these younger guys? Like, how do you stack it up with those two specifically compared to everybody else?
That's exactly. If Chase was here with my next pick, I was going to take him. Because to the same point, Chase is the only guy left who is both. I mean, he's young. You're gonna have to pay him. But he is incredibly young. I still think the arrow is going upwards. I actually just started charting Joe Burrow the other day. The way he comes back and plays the ball, dude, I think it's a very underrated aspect of his game. Like, we all think about, he's big and all the yak stuff and all the vertical stuff. No, dude, the way he comes back to the ball and is able to play in traffic is really, really insane to me. So yeah, to me, Chase, in terms of like tiering these guys, even with the contract in mind that you're about to pay him, I don't really care. He would have been up here. Because yeah, at that point, you're either going into the guys who are really old, or like you said earlier, the 2020, what would it be, 2 class of like Chris Olave and Drake London, great players. Maybe they go at the end of this exercise or something, but it's not the same tier as what you're getting at Ja'Marr Chase.
So let's do that. Ja'Marr Chase this year is $9.8 million, 21.8 on his 5th year option, and then it'll be year 1 of an extension. If you average that out, it's probably about $16 million with the cheap first year of the extension. If you look at those other guys, the Garrett Wilsons and the Chris Olaves, 5, 6, and then probably 18 or so on their 3rd year. So that's 11, 18, 30. So it's 10 million compared to 20 million. That's a pretty big gap, but this has become one of those positions when it comes to the top tier guys, similar to what we were talking about with quarterbacks, in my opinion, Diante. Don't skimp. Like, this is something that's worth investing in. It is worth having one of these true difference-making type guys, even if there is about a $10 million gap between them and some of the other younger 1B-ish type receivers.
Well, and what we're seeing in the NFL now is, I think, more GMs and more head coaches are accepting of the fact that it's not the scheme that'll boost a quarterback if you don't have a top end quarterback. It's having the weapons that really that lifts the boats, right? And you need to have a guy like that. And if I went into this exercise thinking, if I'm building offensively, how can I protect myself against having a mid-tier, average or replacement level type of quarterback starting? I want guys like Justin Jefferson. I want guys like Ja'Marr Chase. And then everybody else below that, to the point that you made, Robert, if this was hey, we're taking the top 15 guys that are 25 and under, I might consider some of the younger guys a little bit higher than I did in this exercise. But if I'm taking a look at the field, I need to have top end talent, because I know we need to go be able to break defenses to be effective, in a league where we're seeing more and more often defenses are getting better at taking away explosive plays. I need guys that can do it all to be able to keep us explosive on the offensive end.
This is the first time that we've done this exercise that I haven't drafted the receiver very high. Typically, I come away from the top 5.
I was certain that you would. I was certain that you would.
And you know why I'm not? And it's because I talked myself into some of the guys on the second and third level. If I have to get them a little bit later, I think I'll be okay with that. But as we've gone through the exercise and now those 2 guys are gone, I'm already feeling like itchy. I don't like the fact that those 2 guys are already off the board. And now I somehow, by the time this gets done, I'll have a receiver. But where I have to go now that those top 2 guys are gone, it just makes it a little bit more difficult. And again, you have to compromise in a way that I typically haven't when we've done this exercise in the past.
Imagine how I feel. I have no edge rushers and corners went off, and I didn't get any of them.
Well, I think I might hurt you even a little bit more here with my next pick. I was surprised he was still here.
Wait. Isn't it me now? 7th?
Oh shit, it is you.
Yeah.
All right, you're up.
Rob him, Derek.
Okay. You're up. I'm terrible at keeping track of this.
I am going for the first contract play, I think, and I'm going to pick Will Anderson. Yeah, I'm a big time. I'm picking him for partially the same reasons that I think the Houston Texans picked him, which is this is a culture fit. If that makes sense. I like this to me. I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous for the course of the exercise, but Anderson to me is just a player who does everything right. He carries himself exceptionally well, and you even see this in the way that he plays. Like he to me is just, you need a dude who's going to go set the run, he'll do it. You need a dude who's going to go take a guard and punch him in the face, he'll do it. Like he is very not afraid to go do the dirty work, which I don't think you get a lot from these guys who are, top 5, 250-pound edge rusher. Like those guys want to go get the passer, dude. And Anderson obviously does that. But the fact that he has this in his bag and he's very willing to do everything for your defense and can be a 3-down player, that goes a really, really long way. For me, it's why I loved different players, but I loved Khalil Mack. I'll bring him up again. It's because the same thing. Like he's very willing to go do all the dirty work. So I just love that style of player. And then purely as a pass rusher, he's probably not in that elite tier that Garrett is, or even Parsons, or even like the best of Nick Bosa.
So you're going to take him 7th overall when he's not in that tier? You feel good about that?
Yeah. Well, to me, the only other pass rushers that you could take here are very expensive and or old and or injured, i.e. Nick Bosa. So I was very willing to go for the young guy because at some point I need to take a guy who's not going to, pinch my pockets. But I just love the way Will Anderson plays. And when I say like, he's not in that elite tier, I think he could still be like right in the next one where he's still getting a dozen plus sacks. Yeah. Just maybe not in the like literally every year all pro conversation. But again, I'm totally fine with that with the run defense stuff. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but like the culture fit thing, I think with specifically a guy like him actually goes a long way and like kind of sets the tone for your defense.
How do you feel about this, Diante? You and I have like an existential Will Anderson conversation every single year. Let's let this be it. This is this year's version of that conversation.
Derek invoked the name, and I remember sitting on this show with Nate before he was drafted, and I was probably talking circles around like, I know I'm not allowed to bring up Khalil Mack. I am not allowed to bring up Khalil Mack. That's not fair for the prospect. You're not supposed to bring up names like this when you talk about these players. You're not supposed to talk about guys like Derek Thomas. But when I watch this guy and you just talk about motor, attitude, approach to the game, how you play the run, the motor when you talk about pass rush, the relentlessness, I think that the way I described him coming out of Alabama was he was the only player I watched in that class that is always affecting the pocket. There are some guys that are going to be better in terms of moves, right? There are some guys that are going to be better in terms of pure get off. There are guys in this class I might have graded ahead in terms of get off, in terms of your bendiness, in terms of your hand fighting. But when it just comes to an understanding of how to affect the pocket, how to continue working, how to beat double teams, how to set an edge in the run game, he brings a combination of those factors that you just don't find in guys that are this young, right? There are details in his game that takes pass rushers years to get, because to Derek's point, they want to go do the sexy stuff, right? I want to go work my ghost move and go get to the quarterback. I want my ESPN splash reel to look good with these sack strips and all that. And I do think that he still has potential to get there. To Derek's point, is he ever going to be like a 20 sack guy? Maybe not. But I think that he can probably be 12 to 14 year in and year out and legitimately, bring the type of motor and physicality you need to be like the best run defending edge in the NFL. That kind of potential, I think, is very real with him. And that's why I think if I was going to take a young edge, that would have been my guy.
Okay. Would you have taken him this high? Now, I appreciate you rationalizing the choice, but let's get down to it. Would you have taken him this high considering the fact that he probably will never be one of those 20 sack guys?
For me, no. He was underneath the top 15 line for me. He was on my board, though. He was on my board just below my top 15, only because it's not proven yet that he is a down in, down out pass rush, high pressure rate sack guy. But if you produce that way, obviously that would change the consideration. For me, no, I wouldn't take him here. I have other guys I have my eyes on that might not play like premium positions, like edge, but I'm not mad at what Derrik is doing and the rationale behind it.
I love Will Anderson. I love watching Will Anderson play. I would take Will Anderson on my real life football team any day of the week for $10 million a year. But it's those two considerations. We've only seen it for a year. So, I mean, that's something you have to think about, just lack of track record compared to other guys. And I do think that even if he's going to be an 88 on Madden for the next 15 years of his career, and he's probably going to win Super Bowls and be a guy that goes down as like, let's say Hall very good type player, like 6'8" type guy, like that type of guy. I would almost write that in pen right now, independent of a major injury. But I think it's the lack of like uber crazy ceiling that would hold me back specifically to take him this high.
And I think all of that is totally fair. Like I said, a lot of this is like culture fit, which to me, if I'm thinking about it like I'm building a team, that matters to me a lot. I will say the other thing,
Derrik is the Dan Campbell of the quarterback.
I was just going to say Derrik's my favorite person in football because he will do all the smart work stuff and all the data and all the charting. But if you really ask him, he's only going to talk about the players that he enjoys watching, and that's the way that's the way you're supposed to approach this sport.
Listen, Myles Garrett is setting the tone physically. Will Anderson is doing it mentally, and I'm good on defense now. I will say though that my other only like co-rationalization here, I don't think there are like any other rookie contract players. I mean, there are some where you get like maybe the last year of the rookie contract. I don't think there are any other rookie contract players that are really in this category for me, except for maybe one other defensive player that will probably go later.
What do we think about Aiden Hutchinson? Does he even sniff this list for you guys? If we're talking about cheap-ish pass rushers.
Personally, I didn't consider him.
He would be on my board, but I'm a little bit lower on him than this. He would probably be in the like 15-20 range for me. And I know like we've seen more production out of him, but I just think Will Anderson is a more complete player.
He's 18th for me, and he was the only other cheap-ish pass rusher as part of this exercise. And honestly, it's part of why I was so motivated to get Micah Parsons at 2, because the pass rushers dry up pretty fast. They either get very expensive and injured, like you mentioned, or you have to cut some corners. And so that's surprising because it felt like there was always going to be 4, 5, 6 of those guys that you could choose from. But TJ Watt's making $30 million a year and he misses games, not last year, but 2 years ago, he missed 7 games. So there's those considerations with pretty much every other guy at that position, which I didn't necessarily know until I started doing this exercise, which is an interesting conclusion to reach. All right, I'm at 8, and I had an idea of how I wanted to do, where I wanted to go with this pick and who would be available. I did not think this next guy would be here, so it's kind of thrown a wrench into my plans. This is hard. I have 2 guys that I'm picking between that I did not think I would have to be picking between.
This is the range where the game gets difficult to play.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball here. Shit.
Do it. I just did. You got to one up me. Let's go. I want to
because I didn't think I'd have to do this, and now it's really hard. I'm still going to go with Sauce Gardner.
Damn it.
All right. I mean, okay. So I had a different direction I was going to head with this, but I thought he was going to be gone. I had him at 6th on my board. He's 24 years old. You're going to get age 24, 25, 26 seasons. One of the biggest things to worry about with corners is volatility in play. You watch it, and guys have up and down seasons all the time. It's just hard to bet on a guy to be consistent at that spot year over year. He's been arguably the best outside corner in the league over the last 2 seasons. Like the production's absolutely insane. So the consistency has been there. And if you look at how cheap he is compared to a lot of the other guys on this list, $9 million this year, 10.6 next year, and then his 5th year option is probably gonna be around 20. So we're talking like 13 million, which is half of a lot of the other defensive players that we're going to discuss here. So that's why I feel okay about it. I mean, this is the 2nd year in a row. If you look at the PFF numbers, he is the highest forced incompletion percentage in the league among full-time starters. That is really hard to do year over year. And even if he's not quite as malleable as Surtain is in terms of deployment, I'm just fine sticking him outside the numbers on one half of the field and then building my defense around it. I can live with that just fine.
Well, and like you said, you get a cheap year over Surtain anyway. So like if my tiebreaker was the malleability that I get out of Surtain, the coin flip or the other side of that coin can be, well, you get another cheap year out of Gardner and he's the same quality of player. It's just a matter of which style do you prefer. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
This is very hard for me. I did not anticipate going that direction. There are guys that it's sad for me to leave off, but I just think that the corners, it's such a smaller list compared to other positions here. There just aren't that many guys I would even consider. So the fact that he's still there and he's as cheap and as young as he is, I just have to jump on that because I can find defensive interior players later. I can find receivers later, and corner is just, it's going to dry up a little bit faster than that. So I'd rather jump on it now and not have to scrape anything together by the end.
I agree. I mean, giving away a little bit of my draft board, that was the last guy at this position that I have above my top 20 line. The rest of the guys, it's like when I start thinking about contracts.
I have one more.
When I start thinking about contracts, consistency in play, how sticky I think they'll be year to year, trying to remove them from their current schematic context and looking at them, just kind of in a general sense. That's the last guy I had at corner that I would consider this highly. The rest of the guys is more of it depends on what is and isn't available for me later on.
All right. Well, so I feel comfortable asking you this then. You do not have Derek Stingley in your top 20.
He is not in my top 20. If this was a 25 and under, if this was strictly a 25 and under draft, he makes it. But
what keeps him off for you?
To me, it's durability.
Okay,
I do have.
Totally fair.
I am starting to really get concerned about how many times I can count on this guy to be there for 15 plus games in a season, and I just don't think we have gotten the top end production that I would like to see to keep him in the conversation with guys that we have already seen deliver at an all-pro level, right? Like, even if I'm trying to be more optimistic on where his developmental arc can be, and everybody on this show, and I'm sure most of the people that are listening know how I feel about Derek.
That's why I'm so surprised.
So I know that this is probably a shock to hear, but for me, at this point, when we start talking about the top non-quarterbacks in the league, I can speak from my perspective. I lean a little bit more on you got to show me.
Yeah.
You have to show me first for me to believe that you're worthy of being in this conversation. And Stingley's close. He's just not there yet. One of the better guys in terms of our younger talent, but not there yet if we talk about the rest of the league.
He's on mine just because I think that the flashes last year were so tantalizing, and the lack of other corners on this list, it pushed him up a little bit higher for me. I'm not going to ask you to give it away, Derek, whether or not he's still lingering out there for you. So you could still take him, but
I mean, I'll show my board a little bit with him as well. He would have been like in the 20 to 25 range for me.
Okay.
So like
all right. So I was the only one to have him in the top 20. That's interesting.
I will say, like, with my last pick, it would have been a consideration depending on how everything went. But with me getting Surtain at the very top, I was like, I probably would have been okay.
This is throwing such a wrench into my plans. I really thought I knew how this was going to go. I just assumed Sauce would be gone and I would be able to do some weirder shit at 8. And now that I couldn't, I'm going to have to really pull out the weird shit over the last couple picks. All right, Diante, you are up at number 8 here. What do you got for me?
So for me, this is where I'm going to break from everything I believe in terms of positional value and, and all of that. The GM is throwing the hammer down. I'm making this pick. This is my pick. I don't care how you use the guy. He is going to be on my roster. And it's not like he's not a great football player, but for me, this is Kyle Hamilton.
That's who I was picking between. I was picking between Sauce Gardner and Kyle Hamilton, and I thought that Gardner would be gone, and that's why I thought I would get Hamilton at 8. All right, explain why that this is a little bit surprising in terms of positional value considerations with some of the other guys on the board. Why does this feel like you're putting your stamp on it?
To me, it almost has less to do with production and more just about what's available to you in terms of play style.
Yeah.
If I can match up however I want to match up defensively and get this guy next to where I think the football is going, right? It's the same way we talked 5 years ago about Derwin James. It's effectively the same conversation. And then you got to add in the fact that
but I think he's better now
than
Derwin James ever was.
I was going to say Derwin is a little bit more twitchy and explosive than Kyle is, but when you talk about size, consistent tackling ability, he does have great ball skills. I think even better ball skills than he was given credit for coming into the league. You see his feel out in coverage, the fact that he can match up well one-on-one with tight ends. There's really nothing that you can't ask this guy to do defensively. And for me, when you talk about versatility, taking away explosive plays, so much of that is matchup based. You've got to think the way the NBA teams do now about having wings that can switch out on the perimeter. That's what this guy is. He's emblematic of that approach defensively. And then you think about the fact that we get to watch him in Baltimore, which is probably built better than any other team in the NFL, to be able to use a guy like this to the best of his abilities. You can make an argument that he is the most complete back seven player in the NFL if you wanted to.
Where'd you have him, Derek, on your list, Kyle Hamilton?
I was going to take him with the next pick if he was there. Like, Kyle is just, and Diante said it, Kyle hits, dude. Like, he hits and tackles. Like, specifically that San Francisco game, he had a number of moments where even, he was just, I don't know, man. The way he plays near the line of scrimmage, to me, is very, very rare. And when you can do it with his size, his length, and still go out and play just in the slot man-to-man if you need to, there just aren't a whole lot of guys who can do that. Like I think outside of corners and defensive ends, it's really, really hard to find defensive players who truly set the tone and shape of your defense. Kyle can do that. Hamilton can truly change the way that your defense is allowed to play. And that's why he should be taken here. And then when you consider age, he's still cheap for a little bit. It just lights out player, man.
He's so very cheap. He's probably the cheapest player we're going to talk about in this exercise.
Because he fell in that draft.
Yeah, he fell in that draft. So he's the back half of the first round. He's only going into year 3. So we're talking $4.5 million this year, $5 million next year, and then probably $18 million on his third-year option. That's a $9 million average over the next 3 years. I'm confident in saying, maybe outside of one guy I might pick later, there's not going to be a single other player on this list that has a single-digit average over the next 3 years. And if you look at the way the safety market has gone, Antoine Winfield got a $21 million extension 20 minutes before we started recording this thing. He is now the highest paid defensive back in the NFL, not a corner. Antoine Winfield is. So if you look at the direction of the safety market and where it's going for some of these top guys, you're getting a real discount by picking Kyle Hamilton on this contract. And that's why I really wanted him. And I'm very sad that even if I got sauce and didn't think I was going to, I really did want to leave this exercise with Kyle Hamilton on my team. And I'm a little bit bummed about it. All right.
About my vibes, man.
Listen, it's good vibes. It is very good vibes. All right. We're back at 10 here with you, Derek, heading into round 4. What do you got for me?
Okay, so I'll tip my hand a little bit. This is an offensive tackle, and I'm basically debating if I want one extra year of cheap play or do I just want the player I think is better. And I think I want to go with
I had them right next to each other on my board. They are right one and then the other.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to go with the player I think is better, which to me is Tristan Wirfs, Tampa Bay Buccaneers left tackle. He, to me, is just the fact that he could walk into the league, play right tackle at an all-pro level, and then just, hey, man, we need you to go play left tackle now, and still plays that, he didn't get nominated to all-pro this year, but he played at pretty close to an all-pro level. Absolutely. The fact that you can just flip-flop from right to left like that is completely insane. I think he is truly one of those offensive linemen that is not quite in the Penei Sewell tier of, offensive weapon where he is just road grading and you can do a handful of different things with him offensively. But he is pretty close. And he's the only, I'm actually really excited to see the Bucs run game now that they fixed the interior a little bit, because I think that they could be a really cool run game with what he's able to do.
Yes.
But then just as a pass blocker too, he is just, what you want in a left tackle, there have been some guys that get drafted over the years because they do some cool highlight stuff like Greg Robinson or whatever. a left tackle, you just want set it and forget it. I want to not even know this guy's name, but like I never want to hear his name called for the entire season. That's Tristan Wirfs. Like he is just the length, the way that he's able to move at that size. He's just an incredibly sound technician, and when you have his level of athleticism, it's just really hard to deal with. Like he can deal with speed, he can deal with power, he can deal with guys who have really good hands. Like he to me is just, again, not quite in that Penei Sewell tier. He to me was kind of one of one when it came to the offensive tackles here, but Wirfs was as close as anybody else. So I'm very comfortable getting him here.
In terms of play, I would have taken him right up there with Sewell. I think that they're neck and neck in terms of what I'm after. The only differentiator between them is it's one more cheap year of Sewell, even after the extension. That's the only thing that separates them in this exercise for me. I would have been very comfortable taking Wirfs where I took Penei Sewell if this was last year and they were the same age. So he's at 18.6 this year, and then he's going to get an extension. His extension is going to reset the market for tackles. Right. I would not be surprised.
And it should.
If it was $30 million a year, but it's still the first 2 cheap years of that extension. So if you look at the Sewell extension as a baseline, let's say it's $15 million in year 1, $25 million in year 2 of the extension. You're talking a $20 million average over the next 3 years. That's not bad. Compared to some of the other guys we're talking about on this list, that's still a pretty good deal for one of the top 3 to 4 left tackles in the NFL, independent of contract, independent of age. So he probably would have been the next guy off my board if I had not taken Sewell. So I don't mind this whatsoever. All right. I'm up now. Okay. Last question. Were you picking between him and Rashawn Slater? Was that your...
Yeah.
Is that what you were? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And it also came down to a little bit, I know Wirfs missed time 2 years ago, but Slater does miss more time generally. So I was a little bit scared of that, but yeah.
Wirfs, they're
both still very good.
I had Wirfs 9 on my board and I had Slater 10 on my board.
Yeah.
So if I were just going by my draft board, I would pick Rashawn Slater here, pop him on the left side and have Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater and just profit for the rest of the time. I'm not going to do that because I like some versatility and I like distributing my resources here. All right. I think I have to do this because I think I've taken him every single year as part of this exercise. I'm taking A.J. Brown.
Okay.
And so here's the reason.
You're not going to protest out of me for A.J. Brown pick.
You get ages 27, 28, and 29 seasons. So he's still relatively young. And similar to the conversation we have about Myles Garrett, I'm not responsible for what the rest of the contract looks like in all the void years after these 3 years are over. So all I'm dealing with right now is $12 million, $17.5 million, and $23 million. That's an $18 million average over the next 3 years. So that's cheaper than what you're going to get with Jefferson, Chase, a lot of the other extension-ready guys that we've talked about here. So I feel just fine with that. If you look at what A.J. Brown has been over the last 2 years in Philly, the fact that when given opportunities, he's still a yak monster, he's still incredible with the ball in his hands, and somehow over the last 2 years, he's turned into like one of the best ball-winning vertical threats in the entire NFL, even though we didn't know he could do that, I'm just fine. Even if he's a tiny bit older than some of these other guys and a couple of the other guys I was considering a little bit later, I just think that he is still one of the best football players in the NFL, and the price and the age are still good enough for me to feel okay about taking him here.
All the logic needs to be at this range of the draft for me is he a sick player or not? A.J. Brown's a sick player.
So if we're getting to the reason why I've taken him every single year, that is the reason. It is because I still think that he is one of the sickest players in the league. And aesthetics is a big tiebreaker for me. And his overall aesthetic as an NFL player, the way he plays, the way he looks in the uniform, all of those things, not the most important considerations here, but at least worth taking into account when you're trying to differentiate between these guys.
You're building an incredible get off the bus team. I'll definitely.
That's all I want, man. That's all I'm after.
Listen, I was talking about culture fit earlier. It's the same thing. It's just, it's a little bit of a different avenue, but it's the same idea.
Yeah, there are a couple other receivers that I was thinking about. We could talk about this when we discuss who wasn't taken. And there's one other guy that now I have to take him with my last pick because he needs to be on my team in order for me to prove a point. But I feel okay about taking A.J. Brown here, even with a couple of the other receivers that are intriguing to me waiting around the bend. All right, We're at pick 12 now. Diante, you are up. Who are you taking at 12?
I was really hoping that a couple of these names would have been taken up already, so I didn't have to agonize over this so much. I have one that's like this is definitely a head versus heart situation for me. I'm gonna go with Quinnen Williams here. I'll take Quinnen Williams here. I need some more trench help if I'm looking at my top 5 picks. And to me, I think that what I've seen from Quinnen Williams the last couple of years, obviously he merits the extension that he got, right? I don't think anybody sneezes at what he's getting paid when you look at the
It's already a discount.
Absolutely.
It's already a discount when you look at the money. It's crazy.
Absolutely. And then you look at the production for what you're going to be paying. I mean, you're getting a legit guy, you're getting a legit pass rushing threat from the interior, and a guy that commands doubles every time in the run game when he's locked in. And I think that he's proven himself to be durable enough to where I feel good about his ability to stay on the field over the next 3 seasons.
I love him. He was right in this range on my board. He's still pretty young. You're getting ages 27, 28, and 29. And even on that extension, it's like 20-ish million each of the next 2 years and then 25 in year 3.
I'll take
Look
that
at what
every day of the week.
interior players are getting. I mean, the numbers are getting crazy when you consider the Chris Jones contract and where some of this is headed. And if you look at it on a per snap basis over the last 2 years, the most productive interior pass rushers in the NFL in some order have been Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, and Quinnen Williams, each of the last 2 years. And he's 26 years old right now. So I have no problem with this whatsoever. How high was Quinnen Williams for you, Derrik?
He was in like if I was going to end up picking it like 15 or so instead of 13 like I am with my next pick, he probably would have been in consideration, because like Diante said, there's probably a handful of guys. We all have at this range, just depending on how we stacked our board, of like, I wish a couple of these guys were picked so I could just make the easy pick. And Quinnen would have been in that tier for me, where it's like, I hope a couple other guys were gone so I could just take Quinnen.
When I was looking at what might be available to me at 11 and 14, he was in consideration at 11 if AJ Brown hadn't been there. And I absolutely would have taken him at 14 if he were still there. So the fact that he's off the board is not surprising or not legitimate to me. All right, we're at 13 here. Last round. Derrik, you're up. What do you got for me?
There's like 100 different things I want to do. I want to so badly just like take a "this is what my heart wants" player just to talk about somebody I think is cool. But I don't think
I hope you don't do that, because that's what I want.
I'm not going to do
last
that.
pick, and I'm worried it's the same guy.
I will say though, I'm gonna break I think earlier I talked about, like I was approaching this as if I'm building a team. At this point with who I'm gonna take, that makes no sense. But I'm gonna do it anyway because I just think he's insane. I'm gonna take. I know he's kind of already expensive at this point, but I'm gonna take Maxx Crosby. I just think players do not play that many snaps. He plays like 100% of their snaps. And this almost goes back to the Will Anderson thing, where it's like, it's a culture thing. Like a dude who can play this many snaps with that kind of motor and be in the backfield all of the time, both in the pass game and in the run game, to me goes a long way. Purely as a pass rusher, he is freaky the way that he can bend for a guy his size. Like he is just unbelievably explosive and unbelievably flexible. And I think that that's dangerous for almost every offensive tackle in the league to have to deal with. He's incredibly strong. Like if he just gets both hands into your chest plate and tries to run you back, he's probably going to be able to do it more often than not. And I think if he had a little bit more help on that defensive line right now, he would, I think, even be more productive than he's been, which is crazy for a guy who's averaged about 13 sacks over the past 2 seasons. And then as a run defender, outside of, to bring him up a third time, outside of like Khalil Mack at his best, Maxx Crosby might be the best run defending edge in the league right now. Like he is just an ass kicker, dude.
Yes.
Like setting the edge, getting in the backfield. If they like spike him, against zone flow, like he'll get in the backfield, like just everything you could potentially want to do with the defensive end of the run game, he can do it. And the fact that, like I said, he's doing this while playing 100% of the snaps is insane. Like, Myles Garrett, I loved him. I take him first overall every single time, but he plays closer to like 75% of the snaps, which is still a lot, and you're affecting the game a ton. Maxx Crosby is out there every single down, giving 100% every single play. It is really, really hard to find front seven players who give you that kind of value literally every single snap. So like I said, completely breaking my idea of I'm building a team here because I already took 2 other edge rushers. But I don't know. Maxx Crosby is just the way he plays to me is insane. And two, this first year in his contract, you're only paying him about $13 million, which for a top 5 pass rusher is pretty good money. And then after that, it's like 22 and 23 million. But again, that's to me not that insane for how good he is. So I'm very comfortable taking Maxx here.
I hate to break it to you, buddy. That 13 million you're looking at was from last year.
Well, nevertheless, I don't care.
So you're looking at
24.
You're looking at 24 and a half this year, 27 and 27. So
I'm still fine with that for what he is, honestly.
That's the right price, right? Like you're totally fine with doing that. Here's my only counter. You could get Nick Bosa for the same price, and they're the same age. Would you rather have Maxx Crosby or Nick Bosa for the next 3 years at pretty much the same price?
Bosa scares me a little bit for health reasons. That's the only like coin flip here, or that's the wrong word. The only like tiebreaker here is that Bosa's health scares me a little bit. And I think it's more likely that he's going to end up potentially slowing down at the end of this than Crosby is. But I think they're both basically the same tier player.
I think that's fair. I think I'd still rather have Bosa because I think at his best, he's just like a tiny bit more terrifying to me. It's 14.6, 20.5, 42 is next 3. So it's like a $25.5 million average. That's about what Crosby's at over the next 3 years. Right. And a lot of these edge players that we're talking about, or just in the defensive line, elite defensive line guys that we're discussing, a lot of them are in that range. I mean, Chris Jones, I don't know if he's going to get drafted. He's at $30 million essentially over the next 3 years with his 30, 31, 32 seasons. So there are not that many cheap, young, productive guys at those spots. So what you're paying for Crosby isn't necessarily that much of a markup compared to some of the other guys that you could take here. All right, so that means I'm up at 14. This one's easy for me just because I was 100% going to leave this draft with him on my team in some way, shape, or form. I mentioned this with the first 2 guys, that they were unusual in how they move, how they're built. I'm taking Dexter Lawrence.
Nice.
Oh yeah,
to me,
I love that.
He was close. He was close to this range for me. He was right there.
The question for me was going to be if Quinnen Williams and Dexter Lawrence were on the board, which one would I take? Just because Quinnen Williams has been so productive as a pass rusher. But for me, the tiebreaker would have been, even if both of them were there, what Dexter Lawrence gives you as a pass rushing nose tackle is insane. There is no one else in the league like him. So the fact that you can drop him as a one technique and he can rack up 65 pressures a year for you while playing 700 to 800 snaps at like 350 pounds. And I can stick him next to a 295-pound undersized 3 technique and feel totally fine about the construction of my defensive line. That's why he gets the nod for me. Just because what you can do with him is so different than what you can do with even the rest of these truly elite interior players. That's what I want. I just want somebody who's different than everybody else. And even if he's expensive and even if he's on an extension, I still don't think that precludes me from taking him here compared to some of the other guys available.
No argument with that. No argument there.
To me, it's almost the same logic as Hamilton. Obviously, very different positions. But like I said, outside of edge and corner, you're not finding that many guys who like change the structure and how you're allowed to play defense. Dexter is one of those dudes, man. Like, they're just, like you said, 350 pounds, should not move the way that he's allowed to move. And he can just do things that other nose tackles really have like almost never been able to do. Like, you know, for a minute there, Vita Vea was like incredible, right? But he wasn't incredible in this way. Like, he was a good pass rusher for a nose tackle.
Right.
Dexter is just like a really good pass rusher for any defensive tackle.
He's been top 5 in pressures among interior defensive linemen each of the past 2 years. And typically with these guys, you know, they're playing 25 snaps a game, 30 snaps a game. He was top 7 in snaps played among interior players in 2022. And he only played 16 games last year, but he averaged 44 snaps a game. That would have been good for top 15 among all interior players. He just checks every single box. The guy is unlike anybody else in the league. So I'm very happy that I was able to do this. If you look at the numbers, it's about a $22 million average over the next 3 years, which that's the going rate for interior players. And if you look at the Chris Jones contract and the direction of this, that number is only going up. So I feel very okay about where he sits here for the next 3 years. All right, Diante. This is it, buddy. You're here at 14. What do you got? Or 15?
First thing I want to say is Fred Warner, Roquan Smith, all my favorite linebackers, Micah Fitzpatrick, all you guys. Like, I still love all you guys.
We'll do a best of the rest after you make this pick, so don't worry.
Still love all those guys. This is probably a player that shouldn't be at 15. It just so happened that things worked out this way. I'm going to go ahead and take Nick Bosa. We'll take Nick Bosa here and feel good about it, right? Like, yes, he's been paid, but for what you're paying him, like you said, when you average out the cap hits, when you average out what the salaries are going to look like, you're still getting top end pass rush production. And I'll just bank on the fact that I'll do something to keep the guy healthy. And if we've got to load manage, then we'll load manage to make sure that we're able to get him to the postseason as healthy and as close to peak form as we can possibly have him. Because what he is as a pure pass rusher is just different, right? Like, when you think about what the San Francisco defense has been, what that tree of coaches has brought to the NFL, a lot of that is built around finding edge rushers that meet the Nick Bosa profile. You don't have a lot of guys that can be 4-point stance in a 9 technique and still be able to go affect the game as a pass rusher, set edges as a run defender. The guy tears up the field better than most guys ever have at this position, and he is flexible enough to be able to bend when you need him to bend. He knows how to play with power. You can use him on twists and stunts when you need to. They've been able to build so much of their pass rush plan around the unique talents of Nick Bosa. I have to have that on my defense.
Yeah, I don't mind this at all. And the fact that he got paid, obviously, it's the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL right now, but you still get enough cheapness over the next 2 years to make it worth your while, and he's still relatively young. So yeah. I don't mind this at all. He was probably right in this range for me on my board. So I totally understand that. All right, let's get to some of the best of the rest here. You mentioned Fred Warner. Derrik, how much does it pain you to not have Roquan Smith on your team as part of this exercise?
I was debating so hard with my last pick. I was like, do I just take the linebacker because I want to talk about him? Because I'm telling Diante was saying earlier, I just want to talk about the players that I think are cool. Roquan is like the coolest player in the league, dude. Like, it just they don't make linebackers.
Roquan Smith is the coolest player in the league. Derrik Klassen and no one else. I love Roquan Smith, but you are the only human on this planet who would say that.
Well, it almost goes back to the Hamilton point, or like we said about Dexter Lawrence. He truly changes like the complexion of your defense, because linebackers who can both like run the pole the way that he can, who can take away 2 or 3 routes and zone distributions the way that he can, but also if you call a screen, he's blowing it up 10 times out of 10 because he is faster than everybody else on the field. Or if you try to run perimeter, he's getting there and stopping you for a 1-yard gain because he's faster than everybody on the field. They don't make him like that, man. They just don't make him like that. Like, he is. What's funny too about Roquan, I love linebackers who come up and hit a guard. Roquan doesn't really do that, but he's so incredible at everything else that I'm willing to he is what he is. He's a unicorn. He's incredible.
This is why it's so funny to me, because you have 6 foot, 230-pound Roquan Smith on
that might be generous
on a good day. And the fact that your favorite defensive player of all time might be Dont'a Hightower, and you also love Roquan Smith, it makes me happy, because you're just an open-minded person. You're not putting guys into boxes. Whoever you love, that's who you're going to love. That's totally fine. All right, Diante, you mentioned Fred Warner. Who else pained you that you could not have them on your team?
Thinking about these are all just like my favorite guys since they were in college. So Fred, obviously, for obvious reasons, everybody knows how I feel about Fred Warner, and then that's San Diego's, pride and joy. So I have an emotional investment with him. Micah Fitzpatrick is another guy that I think if I don't end up with 2 wide receivers, these are kind of like the players I'm thinking that I might want to go take. The big swing that I was considering, and maybe I get to this guy if we have extra round or so, would have been Christian McCaffrey. And just throwing up.
I was going to ask you guys if you guys would have taken Christian McCaffrey. He was one of my next guys off.
Honestly, if I wasn't thinking about like positional value and the timing of contracts and where you are on the age trajectory and that whole thing, I would have very easily just thrown up the middle finger and been like, you only get one chance to have a guy like Christian McCaffrey if he's on the board. There's no other guy in the league that plays that position the way that he does. And that's another guy, to Derrick's point, when you talk about bringing in players that are transformational. There are a lot of guys, like I made a 32-player board of guys that are great players, but there's probably only 18 or so that you can make the argument that, like, from the day he walks in your building, your franchise is transformed. The way you think about how you want to play football is transformed, and McCaffrey is definitely on that list.
I think I could say that about all the guys that I picked, which I
There
feel
you go.
feel pretty good about that. We've seen AJ Brown might be the one where it's just like really gonna say about AJ Brown. I would like you to go watch the Philadelphia Eagles offense with or without AJ Brown over the last couple of years. I'd also like you to go watch the Tennessee Titans offense with and without AJ Brown over the last couple of years. I think there's a pretty good case that he's transformational.
Well, and then you think about the fact that he's basically playing two different positions as wide receiver stylistically. What he was in Tennessee isn't anything like what they're using him as in Philadelphia.
I know,
and he's still one of the 5 best receivers in the league.
It was funny because the first time we did this, we don't need to have an extended AJ Brown conversation, but the first time we did this, I took him very high, like in the top 5. And I think that was after his second year in Tennessee. And part of it was I was at that Titans-Ravens playoff game in Tennessee that one year. And watching him in that game working against Marlon Humphrey from the slot and all like the refined, nuanced things that he was doing, I was like, is this guy like just one of the best receivers in the league? Like, are we comfortable saying that? And so far that's aged just fine. So I feel pretty good about having him on my team. I think every single year we've done this. Outside of Roquan, Derrik, who were the guys that really just hurt your soul that you couldn't end up drafting them?
I mean, Christian McCaffrey would have been one, because that was like, if I'm just like stacking, again, not thinking about like contracts and stuff, I'm just thinking about like 10 players I want on my team. He makes my top 10, dude. Like he does absolutely everything you can imagine at the running back position. And I just love watching him play. Other guys there are a handful of guys that I would have drafted, higher, like, I mean, I don't know, like TJ Watt could have been in this range, like guys that are very obviously good, but it would have been kind of boring to take them. But guys that I really would have wanted to drafted would have been like Drake London. Like, I love me a Drake London. Big ball winner X. That's the dude I love. Or honestly, a couple of the corners.
Among all of those younger kind of tier 2, tier 3-ish receivers, London, Olave, Garrett Wilson, you would have taken London if you had to take any of them.
Yeah, and honestly, I think all 3 of them are like the same quality of player. At that point, it just comes down to like which type of player do you like?
Yeah, it's just taste. Yeah.
I like the 6'4", 220, go win the ball, go run over people kind of guy. So that's why I would have taken London. So that's probably the guy that pains me the most, that I couldn't find a good spot to get him.
Chris Jones and TJ Watt are going to be names that I think angry Chiefs and Steelers fans are going to bring up a lot.
100%.
They're 30 and they're expensive. Like very, very expensive. And with Watt specifically, I know he played all of last season, but he's been hurt over the years. He has missed games. So I think that he's probably one of the first guys off of this list. But when you consider it's $30 million against the cap each of the next 2 years, then an extension and some of those other considerations, that's what keeps him off for me. Chris Jones, same kind of deal. I mean, it's just the money I can save and the years I can save by taking a Dexter Lawrence or a Quinnen Williams over Chris Jones. That ultimately is the tiebreaker for me. We mentioned the linebackers, we mentioned CMC. There are a lot of young tackles that didn't go that I think you can make an argument for. Yeah. Rashawn Slater. I thought I would have taken Andrew Thomas a little bit later if I didn't end up getting Sewell.
Another guy we're thinking about,
If I didn't have Wirfs, I would have done it.
That's exactly how I was with Sewell. So that was Thomas was one of those guys at 14 I probably would have taken. Still a really good player, and as the tackle market explodes, his contract is going to look pretty good, and he's still very young. So him and Slater both. Christian Darrisaw is cheaper for longer than a lot of these guys. I don't think he deserves to make this list, but he's going to be a really good value still over the next couple of years. And even though he's on an extension, Mailata is pretty reasonable. Like if you're looking for just very good left tackles that aren't super, super expensive, I thought he was worth mentioning. We talked about Aiden Hutchinson. 2 other receivers outside of the top 10-ish guys like Wilson and Olave from the last couple of years. I would have taken Ayuk if I had not gotten AJ Brown earlier. I love Brandon Ayuk. Even if he's going to be expensive here pretty soon, I would have been fine with that. And Derrik, what do you think about CeeDee Lamb? How far away was Lamb compared to some of the other guys you took, or just your board in general?
So outside of the receivers that did go in this, the ones that we did draft, which I think were just Jefferson, Chase, and Brown, right? Those were the only 3. Yeah. After those 3, the only 2 guys I would have been willing to the expensive guys, because you're going to have to pay Ayuk and CD, were Ayuk and CeeDee Lamb. Like, they were right there in that, like, 15 to 20 range for me. I love Brandon Ayuk and CeeDee Lamb. Like, CeeDee Lamb, the thing about CeeDee Lamb is I think if we did this a year or two ago, I would have been like, great player, but he's kind of slot only. He's a little bit limited in the way that you can use him. Just not true anymore. Like you can throw him outside and he will, maybe he's not, true Devontae Adams, just go beat everybody on the outside, but like he can very much hang as an outside receiver. And then from the slot, he's one of the most dangerous guys across the field in the entire league. So I'm very much would have been, if CeeDee Lamb went in this, last 1 or 2 rounds, totally fine with it. Dude is awesome.
I'm in the same boat. I would have been comfortable taking him. I like Ayuk just a little bit more. It's just personal preference, and I've always loved Ayuk. I would have taken him first, but if you would put Lamb in here, I would have no issue with it. Tyreek Hill is another name I'm sure people will mention. He's 30. He's extremely expensive, extremely expensive. So that's what keeps him off for me. 2 corners I'll throw out. I mentioned Stingley was on my board. He was not with you guys. I could talk myself into the upside, even if the consistency is not there. But similar to that consideration, like year-to-year consistency, AJ Terrell is another guy that the flashes are so good, but it's just hard to bet on corners compared to other premium positions in this draft where you feel I know what Dexter Lawrence is going to be every single game, every single year, as long as he's on the field. And I think that's just harder to do with corners. And that's why Sauce and Patrick Surtain kind of exist in their own little tier, just because they've been so consistently good over those first couple seasons.
And I do think with the corners too, there were a couple I had in like the 25-30 range, but they were all like 1 or 2 year players. And it's just like, if we do this exercise again next year, could we be taking Devon Witherspoon, Trent McDuffie, Brian Branch, Christian Gonzalez? Like all of these guys were like, man, I would love them on my team for what I'm paying them. But in this exercise, it's probably, I can't quite get myself all the way there.
I think Witherspoon is going to be the guy that we look the silliest for leaving off. With Mike McDonald next year, and considering he's cheap for a couple more years after this, I think he might be the guy that was not on this list that rises the highest if we do this again next year.
And I'm glad you mentioned McDonald. What I said about Hamilton, that dude plays from the slot, kind of. He was also more of a safety, but he hits and he plays near the line of scrimmage. You know what Devin Witherspoon does? That man tries to kill people. Yeah. And you just don't find many dudes who play from the slot that are trying to kill people. So I think that's going to be a match made in heaven, him and McDonald.
I 100% agree. So I think that he could make a huge jump next year. The one guy that we did not talk about that I was considering, not solely because of this, but the value is so hard to ignore when you look at what other guys at the position are going to be paid. Puka Nacua makes $1 million a year for each of the next 3 years. And that was hard to ignore as I was building my board. He did make my top 20, and I would have considered drafting him if some of the other receivers had been off the board.
I mean, he's arguably he's in the conversation as the most valuable productive versus cost that we've had in the league, period, especially coming off of last year. And considering what Sean McVay can do with the receiver with Puka Nacua's profile, there's really no reason to believe that he can't continue to produce at a high level.
And I just love it. If we're starting from scratch, everything he can do as a blocker, like what you could do to build your offense through that guy, that is appealing to me. What were we going to say, Derek?
Well, that's the thing. It was kind of like my Will Anderson defense was you walk in and this is a dude who like sets the tone for the offense. This is like everybody wants to be like, oh, well, I can't disappoint Puka, man. He's going out there throwing blocks on some BS 2nd and 8 run. Like I've got to go. Yeah, if he's playing his ass off, I've got to play my ass off. And Puka very much has that. And then even, dude, some of the hits that he took over the middle of the field, like him and Stafford are a match made in heaven because Stafford will throw that ball and Puka will go and find it, whether it costs him his life or not. And it's such a perfect pairing, those two. I love watching them play.
Right now, they're up there with my favorite like receiver quarterback, just aesthetic duo, like the skill sets combined. Another guy we did not mention that I'll be curious how we talk about him after this year. But when you talk about quarterback receiver skill set marriage, going back and watching Nico Collins over the last couple of weeks and the way he plays with Stroud, it's beautiful. Like he's a 6'4" yak monster who is very comfortable catching the ball away from his body over the middle of the field. And he has a quarterback who leads him into space with ball placement every single time he throws the ball to that area of the field. So those two guys, like that's hard for me to ignore, but I think Collins is just one small step below most of the other receivers that we talked about here.
I agree with that. I don't think that Collins he's not in the same conversation of guys that you can just drop in sight unseen and be the
Correct.
same level of player that you would consider the top guys that we've been talking about being in that conversation.
No tight ends, Derrik. What do you think that says?
A tight end is tricky because obviously the two best theoretically are Travis Kelce and George Kittle. They're kind of older. I mean, in Kelsey's case, definitely old. You might not even get to the end of a 3-year contract with Kelce at this point.
Probably not.
And then and then Kittle's a little bit older. Still a great player, but still a little bit older. So I think those are the considerations. And then all the other younger guys, they're really good players, but I just think they're not quite as complete as some of the other guys that I would just rather take at other positions that we did end up taking. Like, there are a lot of really good young talented guys. Like Dalton Kincaid is cool. Sam Laporta is really good. Like Brock Bowers is going to be insane. But a lot of these guys don't really block. And so I think that is a consideration when you're like we're only picking 15 players here that you really want to build the whole ship out of. I think that when you are like axing, a third of your game, it's a tough spot to start, even if guys like Laporta are just unbelievable receivers.
Laporta's a really good player. I think you make an argument that Puka Nacua is a better blocker right now than Sam
is.
Laporta is.
Yeah.
So
He's a lot
that's
better.
why I feel all right with Nacua at $1 million a year rather than Laporta at twice as much, even though theoretically he should give you more as a blocker.
Well, I think, and Derrik kind of touched on something that was a big thought of mine throughout this process is guys like George Kittle, you mentioned Sam Laporta. When I think about positions like tight end, think about linebacker, think about running back, think about like interior offensive line. There are a lot of guys that belong on the board because in any given year, they can be the best at their position. And you kind of want to think like if a guy can be the best at their position by default, you should probably consider them to be one of the 15 best players in the league. But when you're talking about, like you said, Robert, like guys that are going to legitimately get you multiple steps closer to a conference championship game, multiple steps closer to a Super Bowl run, those guys are not like in that conversation yet. Like there were players like Chris Lindstrom for me is going to be on my list because I love watching him play. Quentin Nelson, you can always make an argument like when he's at his best, healthy and available, that guy can wreck shop from the interior. But when we're talking about like top 15 players in the league, it's hard to say I'd rather have that than the more dynamic playmakers or guys that in their prime can legitimately change everything about what you do offensively or defensively.
I love it. This is a very fun exercise. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do it with me. Also, if you guys have not listened to the quarterback version of this show, that is available wherever you get your podcasts. Let's be honest, the quarterback one's a little bit spicier than this. You don't have to really compromise when it comes to having all of the non-quarterbacks in the league available to you as you're picking 15 guys. It's still a fun exercise, but with the quarterbacks, we had to make some tough decisions as you're getting outside of the top 10. So encourage you guys to go check that out. Encourage you to check out these guys and their work throughout the summer. Diante's got some fun stuff coming. Derrik obviously is still putting out plenty of wonderful content. Derrik, where can people find everything that you're working on right now?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at QB Class. That's Class with a K. I'll be doing some features over the course of the summer for Bleacher Report, mostly kind of looking back on the draft class and stuff like that. And then over at Reception Perception, Matt Harmon's site, I'm going to be charting every NFL quarterback, or at least the ones that are expected to start again. So sorry to, my guy Desmond Ridder. I'm probably not going to get to him, but I've already started. I'm through like 5 NFL quarterbacks right now. We're on Joe Burrow, so we're doing good. We're making headway.
Awesome. All right, guys, sincerely appreciate the time and sincerely appreciate all of you guys taking the time to listen. Please come back a little bit later this week. We are continuing our lingering questions series, looking back at a set of 8 questions for each division in the NFL that we feel like were unanswered by the end of last season. Bob Sturm from The Ticket in Dallas and formerly of The Athletic, who does a fantastic job talking about the Cowboys, is going to join me to talk about the rest of the NFC East. That is coming your guys' way on Thursday, so please come back and check that out. In the meantime, sincerely appreciate all of you listening. We'll talk to you soon.